So the book National Populism really steps back from the immediate news cycle to look at the deeper trends and the deeper currents that are reshaping our democracies. And it looks at where these national populist movements have come from, where the populist tradition has come from. And it in particular argues that there are four deep-rooted shifts that are effectively clearing the way for these movements. And it argues that rather than a short-term protest, rather than just a phenomenon among older white men, actually these movements will probably be with us for quite a while to come, given how these underlying currents are changing. I think if you look at the UK political system, there are a number of interesting things going on. The first thing to say is that the vote for Brexit wasn't exclusively a national populist moment. About 70% of Leavers said that they had voted for the UK Independence Party or they would have considered doing so. So that tells us that while that moment that came before the referendum with Nigel Farage and UK Independence Party was quite important for Brexit, it wasn't the whole story. And I think also important was that long tradition of Euroscepticism in Britain, which is a mainstream tradition. It's not outside of the mainstream, it came through the Conservative Party. Where's Britain going as a political system? I think, well, obviously we've seen a number of changes. Scotland and the SNP have become more important. That's made it harder for Labour and the Conservative Party to win an outright majority. Under the surface of the two-party system, meanwhile, we've seen overall rates of volatility increase to some of the highest levels that we've had in the post-war period. So we've seen a lot of, for example, Lib Dem voters going Labour, Green voters going Labour, UKIP voters going Conservative, some working class Labour voters going Conservative. And that's given us a lot of churn and change underneath the system. And that could still have a number of unpredictable effects depending on what the Brexit deal is, what the outcome of the negotiation is, whether we are going to see a full realignment of British politics. We know that the Conservative Party is doing better now, much better among non-graduates and workers. We know Labour are doing better than they have really previously done among millennial students, London and university towns. And so the awkward reality for those of us who work in politics is that we are really in a partial realignment of British politics, but we haven't yet broken through into a full realignment of British politics. And I think we are probably going to continue to see a significant amount of change in the coming years. I think if you look at where the UK is at the moment, one of the interesting things that you can see quite clearly is that even though, for example, Jeremy Corbyn is not particularly popular among all voters, parts of his agenda are very popular, what you might call Corbynomics, issues around nationalisation, issues around that sort of populist call for the many, not the few, the idea that big business is not socially responsible or not paying enough tax or paying too much money to executives at the expense of ordinary workers, or that business should have ordinary workers on company boards. Those kinds of ideas, which the Conservatives have also flirted with at certain points, are very popular. I wouldn't go so far to say as Britain is cultivating an anti-business mood, but I would suggest that business needs to operate incredibly carefully, increasingly carefully, amid a broader public opinion climate that now is much more sensitive, more receptive to the arguments that we need to better balance the economy, we need to better regulate business, we need to keep a much closer eye on things like pay, taxation, regulation, transparency. And all of those things, I think, are not just a fleeting moment, but I think they're quite entrenched. And actually some of them were entrenched before, for example, the Labour Party turned more to the left. And that will have a number of consequences. That sort of almost protectionist spirit, if you like, that we can see in other European democracies too. I think that's going to provide something of a framework in which business is going to have to navigate that quite carefully.